thank you to everyone for sticking with us. I know we always have some attrition on the second day. People have flights to catch and other things to take care of, but thank you for sticking around. We've got John Roberts, who has a PhD in theoretical high-energy physics with 10 years of research experience in high-energy particle physics and ultra-high-energy cosmic rays. Obviously, he now works as the Senior Vice President of Data Sciences and Audience Development for About.com, where he leads a team of researchers deriving insights from more than 20 years of internet data across thousands of topics. And I can also vouch for the fact that he gives a really good explanation of why we believe there's dark matter. So you may want to follow up with him afterwards. Thank you very much for speaking.
This talk will be relatively quick, I think. And it's going to cover a few different things because my background, my current position is a little different to many people in the room. A lot of what we've heard about over the course of the last day and a half are data processes, data systems, and the management, curation, and use of data inside companies that are pretty heavily and easily described as data-driven or data companies themselves. I currently work in digital media. It would be an enormous stretch to claim that digital media is a data-driven organization or a data-based company. I was mentioning to a few people last night, when I first joined the company after leaving physics, I met the COO who'd seen my resume but had no idea. And I was like, oh, you're dark matter. Why did we hire you? And that was kind of the attitude coming into a digital media company, both for myself, but also for a number of other people who I know in New York who are doing data science. And what I'm going to talk to you about today, though, is actually one of the uses of the data that we have, and taking on an industry that's actually specifically not data-driven, and taking on some of the perspectives and beliefs that that industry holds with the data that we have at hand. And so this is going to be a talk a bit about personalization, but I'll cover some of the ways in which we use the data that we have and how that data comes to be in the company. If the clicker works, which I'm not sure that it does.
Just use the space bar.
That would be even better, thank you. There we go. Okay, so this is all about the promise of personalization, right? So the promise of personalization is that if we can collect all the data from all the places about all the things that you do, about everything you read, about every action you take online, we can give you the most relevant recommendations for you. Right? The internet is a large place. There's a lot of things you can do on there. There is no way any one person could just jump into the internet, type in a URL at random, and assume they're going to get something good. The internet itself is a big data problem. The fears that this engenders, and the ones that we're all very familiar with, are, and this isn't true just of the internet, but it's true very broadly across a lot of the data sets that we've been talking about over the last couple of days. Google and Facebook know everything about me. Amazon follows me around the internet. Ad networks are taking my data and selling it around the web without me knowing. There's this shutter the doors, close the windows, stop people taking my data attitude to what's going on. So if we're going to try and deliver on this promise of we're only doing it for your good, we're only trying to collect this data to give you more relevant information, we have to be damn sure that we're actually doing that. Now, if we're talking about BuzzFeed trying to give you more relevant content, that's one thing. But at About, we just launched the 4th largest consumer health site in the US in April. Right? It's really important if we're tracking that kind of information to make sure that firstly we're abiding by both the letter and the spirit of every law that relates to that information, but also that we make sure that anything that we do with that any recommendation we provide of it is right. Right? Getting it wrong in that area is a really bad idea. So this is kind of the Utopian Outline as it's kind of written out in the annals of kind of digital media at the moment. Like you take everything you look at, everything you click, everything you read, you build up a profile of a person, a user, a reader on the internet, which really is a profile of a unique user ID, like a user on a device. Right? And say, okay, this device tends to do these things and go to these places and read this content and behave in this kind of way. And so from that you can infer, or you should be able to infer age, gender, household income, interest profiles, all of that information that gives you a reasonably well-rounded picture of who a person is, and then use that information to provide more relevant recommendations, give people easier paths inside a site or between sites to get to the content that you expect them to want. And also inevitably on the flip side of this to give them ads that they're more likely to be interested in or engage with, or be more aggressive as an advertiser to some people because they're higher value targets. Right? You get all those various pieces in there. So this is the the vision of personalization which is pursued by a lot of digital media companies, it is absolutely the version of personalization that is pursued by a large number of ad and ad tech companies. And this has really come about just because of the profusion of user-level, cookie-level data that exists in the world. This is precisely why the internet is slow, right? Loading a page of text is incredibly fast. The organization in the world that causes the most delay in the internet is Google. Google runs the ad exchanges. Google allows all of this behavior to happen. When an ad loads, it's not an ad loading, it's an ad, and 3 or 4 or 5 or 100 or 200 individual scripts that are coming along with it to all pull data out of your cookies and off your page and send it back to the various chains advertised in the back end. Google runs that ad exchange, and that ad exchange slows down everything that's happening on the page. Without the ad exchange, the page is very quick. That's actually one of the reasons that Wikipedia is actually super quick and has enormous engagement stats that nobody else will ever meet. Google also prioritizes page speed as a signal of quality and strength in ranking in the algorithms. So you can see the version of Google giveth and Google taketh away in this particular ecosystem. So the question we were asking was, does this even make sense? Right? Can we actually do this? Is this actually a solvable problem in our particular world? And then you can ask it more broadly around the internet. But for our world, as a content provider, as a publisher on the internet, should we be doing individual user-level personalized recommendations? Right? It seems like a great idea. We have millions of pieces of content across thousands of topics. It's not sensible to assume the user is going to be able to navigate their way through that without some very heavy guidance. So we have to, my team, specifically my team, has to build the recommendation algorithms, the infinite scroll algorithms, the search algorithms to help people navigate a corpus of content of that size. So, first question, if we go back to this utopian model, you need to go from step 1 to step 2, right? So question 1 is, can you? Can you actually use an interest profile and user behavior on the internet to infer age, gender, household income, even an interest profile? And then the second step is, once you've got all that demographic information, can you actually get to something useful? Can you get a better idea of what people are likely to want to read? We can test it. We have a lot of data, so we did test it. And we have a wonderful laboratory to do it in. So this is the reason why a 20-year-old internet company that hadn't had anything done to it till 2012 now has 5 PhDs across a range of subjects from astrophysics to neuroscience to computational linguistics, because this is the data set and we get to look at it first. This data set is about since January 1st, 2000. Now you've almost certainly all been there. You usually will likely go there once a month. You'll go for completely disparate questions across different topics. You'll get there by searching Google. You'll click a link somewhere in the top 5 or 10 links and you'll go to the page and you'll forget that it was about that you went to. We have studied and checked all of that information. There are good reasons why that's the case, and there's also good reasons why we're taking steps to change that. But about ranks for about 1 in 3 of all queries that are typed into the internet, maybe the top 100 results. And we rank top 10 for a significant fraction of that, and have done for a very long time. And About has always written content to cover more or less any question that we have felt, or the company has felt, needs answered. And actually, the way they've done this is an interesting and fairly unique way, which is that you have individual subdomains, or had individual subdomains, which cover any topic that we felt was interesting. And then we got a writer that we hired on as a freelancer to go write about that topic. And we didn't tell them what to write, we just let them have at it. So this is effectively 20 years of idiosyncratic expertise about all things. And I use the word idiosyncratic advisedly, having done NLP on this corpus. You find some very interesting patterns and outliers when you do that. I'll tell you about a few of them later. But what you see here is the vertical axis is traffic. So this is number of page views coming to the site on a particular month, right? And the horizontal axis is time. So the beginning is January 1st, 2000. The end, I think it was 2014 when we made this plot. And every single band of color here is one of those subdomains, one of those 1,000 topics, right? So this is the strata of interest on About. And you see the macroscopic trends. It gets larger over time. The internet got larger over time. About more or less went with it. That's not surprising. You see the peaks and troughs in the total volume. Right? You see this kind of wonderful double peak that comes in regularly. That's November and January. Right? That's the heartbeat of the internet site, because everyone gets off the internet in December and talks to their family, which is a very good thing for the world. But in the summer, you see a big trough as people go outside and get sunshine, which is also a very good thing for the world. And in here you have Olympics, you have presidential elections. We have 4 of them, I think, in our data set, and so we can track the trends around presidential elections. And you can see lots of things which are regular patterns and many things that are irregular patterns, right? So an example here, you can see the little green daggers in that central band. That's it within our travel content. It's a little triangle of dark green, which is a topic that only spikes in October. And it's big enough to move traffic on the scale of the entire network of about, right? This is big enough to be visible when you're looking at the whole history of this site. It turns out that's our Go New England site, and that's explicitly leaf peeping. Right? People going to watch leaves in New England is big enough to move something which is a reasonable representation of the US's internet interest. The brown blobs at the bottom here are actually coincide with US military action. Right? Highly irregular, and they occur in these 2 points, and then you see a few later on. Turns out that's our political humor site. We have a US military site, we have a PTSD site, we have military family content, we have US military career content, we have foreign policy content. None of those spike to the same extent when you look at this plot as US military humor. The country, when the country goes to war, wants to read jokes and have a bit of a lighthearted laugh about it and get a bit of a break, and yet also are interested in the military action. We saw 2 spikes in September 2001. One is our Islam site. The US suddenly wanted to learn a lot about Islam very quickly. The other one was in our weight loss site. We haven't done a really detailed analysis of this, but the running theory inside the group is that this is the biggest January 1st wake-up call, you have to go on a diet and get fit, that the country has ever been given. And it actually relaxes in roughly the same way if you look at the pattern that falls off afterwards. But as a reaction to domestic terrorism, or terrorism on domestic soil, it is remarkable that out of thousands of topics that could have spiked at that point, those were the only 2 that did, and with massive significance. Anyway, so that's kind of a quick tour of about what it covers. Each of these is a particular vertical. That's what the different broad colors are. And we can use this to look at trends across the internet over the course of the last 20 years. We can see the birth and death of various technologies. We have a Palm Pilot site. Well, I should say we had. It's kind of, you see it declining. You see its lunch getting eaten by the cell phone, and the cell phone gets eaten by the iPhone, and then you see the tablet come in. You see trends in religion over time. The huge benefit of this is that About basically didn't redesign its site for like a decade. The New York Times bought it and it stayed pretty much static. So it gives you a perfectly static laboratory in which to analyze relative interest in topics over time. It's also important that the site is driven by evergreen search queries. So it is not that this interest is driven by what's ever put on the homepage. The homepage of About gets no traffic because nobody actually chooses to go to About as a brand and go there to learn what's happening. So this is actually a pretty good definitional tracking of the breadth of Google searches, Bing searches, and other ways in which people can get to that content. So taking that, can we actually infer demographic data off the back of it? If we have a laboratory like this, can we use it to try and figure out who you are? We have over 1 million documents with evergreen interest. We have demographic data from Google and Facebook. I don't trust either of them. I also don't trust their data, but that's a different question. So we cross-check them against each other, and we find out that actually, given that both of them have sources of first-party data to rely on, they're not inferring who you are. Like you either have a Google Plus profile where you typed in your age, or you have a Facebook profile which has a whole bunch of information about you. And so we cross-check them against each other and find that they agree extremely well. In the broad aggregate, they don't give you individual users, but they'll give us buckets, right? Now we can correlate that topic interest with demographics, and we can start asking questions around, does the content you read infer something about your demographics? Does your demographic infer something about the topics that you're likely to read? So one of the questions that, in fact, our sales team had, and many other people in the company, can we understand millennials? Or, please God, tell me how to understand millennials, which was the specific question in this one, which we slightly rephrased as, what interests over-index for millennials? Because we are scientists after all. So here's an example, right? And it's actually a surprisingly simple thing to do, and it's, even though the content that we have is large, the event level data that gets fired off when somebody comes and visits the site is very large. The profiles of interest by demographic is a very small data set, right? You have a very finite set of demographics you care about, and you have a finite set of topics, and you have an over and under index that you can go build off the back of that by looking at average interest versus expected traffic. So, for example, this is 18 to 24-year-old guys. The black line would be the average About user, and then the green bars are where that particular demographic lies compared to the average About user, right? Really simple calculation, but highly informative. The ordered list here is military careers, sports careers, musicians, film and TV careers. They're interested in the military, they're interested in being rock stars, and they're interested in being actors. It's fabulous. Although, to be careful, the answer really here is, if somebody is interested in going into the military or actors, it is likely that they are over-indexing in the likelihood of being an 18 to 24-year-old male. Not that all 18 to 24-year-old males care about this. As soon as you move up over 25, the film and TV career just disappears. It drops way down the list, and now they really want to go into sales, which is an interesting learning and educational to our sales team, who asked the question in the first place. And then we can go into individual topics and look at the change in interest over time. So, millennial women, it turns out, are 3 times more interested in reading about going to Paris than non-millennial women. It turns out millennial men are exactly as uninterested in going to Paris as non-millennial men. And this started to get interesting. It was like, oh, okay, now we're actually learning some interesting things. And it's not like we're short of statistics. We have massive data sets. We have hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of people coming through these sites. And so the point where we started to say that a whole bunch of astrophysicists and nerdy neuroscientists and computational linguistics inside a 20-year-old internet company were giving the entire millennial population of the US dating advice, that started to get a little intriguing. It opens up a whole new business model, and conveniently we are in the same company as Match. We did not go there. But then you start looking at this in health, right? And you can effectively see your future life laid out in front of you, because you can go decade by decade and look at the predictive health interests of every demographic segment as you get older. That's fascinating, interesting. But in terms of millennials, 18 to 24, is teen health, eating disorders, addiction, schizophrenia, acne, STDs, phobias, contraception, social anxiety disorder. All highly significant spikes. Some of these clearly age-related, right? You need to learn about teen health when you're a teenager. There's obviously a higher spike in interest in eating disorders at that age as well. STDs and contraception are kind of obvious. But schizophrenia, social anxiety disorder, and other stress-related conditions should not necessarily spike for the under 25s. If you've ever watched Girls, the TV show, they hit the nail on the head. They basically all suffer from most of these things on some level. And that just means that, Lena Dunham got it right. She read the mind of her generation very precisely. If you go up to 24 to 35, suddenly the interest flipped completely. It's about breastfeeding, pregnancy, miscarriage, preemies, infertility, and multiples. Again, not surprising, but it's interesting to see what's like. It's always nice when you look at a data set and you see the obvious things stand out like a sore thumb. Like, okay, good. Like, we've derived the obvious thing. And the millennial health interests are just the same as everyone else. It also reminded us and reminded the sales team that millennials are actually 25 to 35 as well as the very young, and they're young families, right? Which is something that I think we often forget about millennials. Entertainment topics, this was a fun one. Women really are interested under 24 in short stories as the most predictive interest of you being a woman under 24. And then manga, TV dramas, young adult books, contemporary literature, performing arts, R&B, punk music, and romance novels. Men are into anime, so there is an anime-manga divide between the genders under 24. Rap, then manga, celebrity gossip, sci-fi, pro wrestling, which is alarmingly high in interest and has been for a long time. Punk music, dance music, war movies, horror, and animated TV. And so the advice from this one is that guys should read a novel or two and talk to girls about it. This is not new news, but it is extremely statistically significant within our data, which was fabulous. News and issues, right? We're in an election year. We've obviously been tracking the interest in various political topics through our data sets over the course of the last year. But when it turns into demographic data for millennials, it turns out that under 24-year-olds, under 25-year-olds really care about foreign policy. Actually, the number one thing that turns up, they care about foreign policy more than any other demographic segment, and then it's journalism, liberal politics. Not shocking, you can actually see the transition from liberal to conservative with Decade of Life. You can also see it in the religion content too. Terrorism, interestingly, race relations, civil liberties, animal rights, the economy. which again was a little surprising. Women's issues, environmental issues in the Middle East. Some of these very cause-based is not new news. Like, this is the generation which everyone has come to realize now is a highly cause-driven generation. But to have them also really interested in, predictively interested in, and over-indexing for interest in the economy and foreign policy, highlights that this is a slightly more serious-minded generation than we might have given them credit for. Also, being interested in women's rights is a better predictor of your age than your gender, which I see as a very positive feature for the future in total, particularly with the way this year's politics is going. We can do this with even more granularity. We can go inside an individual topic area, and we can say within the topic of Christianity, and also our Islam sites, what is the most predictive, or one of the top 3 most predictive topics of being a guy under 24? And I'll let you, well, I'm not going to ask anybody to call out answers. I'm not going to do that in this session, not at this point on a Thursday afternoon. But you can just keep in your head what you think the guess is, because it turns out this is actually true for both the Islam and the Christian side, and this is US audience, US guys under 24. Turns out it's whether or not the religion allows them to get it to 2, which is rather fabulous. Like one of the top 3 things. The other one is like the Illuminati conspiracy, and I forget the third. So we've pretty much shown that we can connect what you read about, what you care about, what you want to read about with your demographics, right? There are predictive signals here of your age and the things that people of your age and gender tend to be interested in, and we can line those up. So we can, from a demographic segment, say here's a probability distribution of things you may be interested in. Right down to the entity level, we have a big entity graph, we have a full probability matrix across that by age and gender. If we see you reading a piece of content, we can also do it the opposite direction and say I now have a probability measure across the demographics of which demographic you may be in. Obviously I can iterate on that as you read more content and build up a profile of you that way and start to get a better and better and better estimation of the age and gender you may be at. So we've had success, right? We've solved that first piece of the problem. We have a way of getting that first piece linked up. But when we look at this more broadly and more widely, there's a very particular trend that stood out, which was really, it's one of the things, it's surprising when you first look at it, and then when you look at it again, you go, oh no, okay, that's actually kind of sensible. So the most predictive topic of a woman's age, the most predictive interest of a woman's age, are actually topics that relate to the person for whom she cares. We saw this in the Millennials. It's fertility content, pregnancy content, and then it moves into baby health, ADHD, child parenting, family cooking, family travel, all of that content going up through the ages. And then at 45, it switches over to the Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and assisted living become predictive of you being a woman 45 to 55. That's obviously not about you. That's about the people for whom you care about. The fact that prostate cancer is a predictive interest of you being an older woman was the thing that really stood out, okay? Now, if you take a very rough approach to this and you just say, okay, you're reading this content, so you're obviously the person who would read this content, you would say that that woman at 45 was a schizophrenic teenager who just happened to be a bizarre sufferer of prostate cancer who was also going through chronic depression, right? The portfolio of interest actually does not line up to an individual person. It lines up to a set of people, right? But it's also true that if you were to take that person, right, every time they came to your site and assume that that person would have the same bag of interest that they'd shown the last time, they will also be wrong. Women on the internet, as we have understood them, are most accurately described by all of the different people for whom they care about, at least. Right? They are multiple people, and likely every time they come to your site, they're going to display as a different person. Men, terrifyingly, are predicted by the toys that they play with. And that's just consistently true. Video games, cars, faster cars, cars without a roof, powerboats and classic motorcycles is in the 45 to 55. Then over 65, if you're reading about model trains, you are pretty much guaranteed to be a man over 65. And I'm not going straight to our entertainment content to get that. I'm literally saying of all topics, of literally all topics, which are the ones that over-index the most for a guy's age. And it is terrifyingly true that it is toys at every decade of life. Yeah, we were both like horrified. And yeah, mostly horrified when we went through this particular exercise.
Is there a correlation between poise and divorce?
Well, there is obviously, there's a very, we can see midlife crises just like right there. It's really blindingly obvious when midlife crisis jumps up. You're like, oh really? Oh, okay. It's also the age at which in the health content men go from caring about running to caring about walking. It's a straight transition at 45 from running to get exercise to walking to get exercise. And at that point we're like, oh, are all of our futures just laid out in front of us. So that poses a fundamental challenge to this model, right? Which is saying that we were trying to understand one individual person, provide one profile of one person, and we've basically come up against 50% of the population who do not consistently behave as one person. They consistently behave as being interested in very specific different topics. And you say, okay, well, what about the other signals that we've got? Maybe we can get a tighter read on this by taking into account things that aren't just the content. Like, do they come in from email? Do they come in from social media? Are they doing very particular things? So people who click through from an email tend to be older. Email skews old on the internet. People who come from search skew older, but organic search skews younger. And then people who reach the site from Facebook tend to skew like 35 to 45. That's more or less the median age of Facebook. It's actually not a millennial platform, as anybody with kids who use Snapchat will know. But at the weekend, people browse more and favorite different content than on a weekday. That's consistently true. We see much higher engagement on a weekend than a weekday, and they read differently. When people come from Facebook, they're 10 to 20 times more likely to share to Facebook, right? So they have very different patterns when they come in from Facebook. So we have some very predictive defining features in our data set. But it turns out these predictive features have got nothing to do with who you are. It is not the case that the person who comes from Facebook always comes in from Facebook. That's the same person who just happened to come from Facebook. But when they came from Facebook, they're likely to share to Facebook a lot more than they did when they came in from an email or from search. So you are a different person when you come in from Facebook. Like, this is your usage behavior on Facebook, and this is your usage behavior not on Facebook, to paraphrase the old PSA. People who come to the site the weekend read more content and browse more. When you're in your weekend mindset, you behave utterly differently from how you do during the weekday. You are a different person. You behave differently. So who you are, like who you are long-term, who you are in total, is a small perturbation on top of the definition of who you are right now, right? And this is the thing that the ad agencies have got fundamentally wrong, because they want to collect all the data about all the things about you right now, and then they want to just hammer you with the same message over and over and over again based on that information, rather than privileging the fact that they have no idea what you're doing on the internet right now, what is top of your mind. Anybody who's been pursued around the internet by an ad following you knows that this is true. Right? Amazon has made a decision that you're going to buy this thing even though you only looked at it once, and they're not going to let you go for a week until you've decided to actually buy the thing. But think about it the other way. How many times have you tried to buy a present for a niece, a nephew, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin? You go on, you'll buy a present for them every year. Every year you'll have no idea what 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old boys are into this year. Amazon knows you're buying for somebody who's not you because they know where you send it, right? They've got the address you sent it to. They've got the name of the person. They can predict that this is a boy. They know that you've bought this for them every year at roughly the same time. And they know what boys want to play with this year. Would it not be useful for Amazon to privilege the fact that you're not you today, you're actually looking for another person, and give you the suggestions for your nephew the day you come to Amazon? Is that not something we would all use? We'd happily be personalized as somebody else on that day. The last point here is actually interesting. So one of the biggest challenges with personalization is getting enough information to really build up a profile of a person. It's fundamentally difficult, right? You're saying that a few data points scattered over a set of months is going to get you enough information to really understand somebody. What we're saying here is, actually all you really need to know is where you came from today, what device you're on, and what's the content you're reading. When we're trying to say that, we'll go from the content you're reading, we'll infer your age and gender, and then we'll come back from that age and gender to generally understand what people who are stereotypically like you, because let's not kid ourselves, what I just ran through early on in this is a stereotype finder. We're looking at broad bucket trends. Will tend to like this content. We would be providing the most stereotypical, biased insight as to what you're likely to want to read next, rather than saying, you're on a piece of content around caring for a parent with prostate cancer, you probably want to read more content about that right now, irrespective of who you are. Because right now, you are a person who cares for a person who has this condition. And by having the hubris to believe that we can understand you through a few sets of pages that have been read over the course of the last month or couple of months or a year, and therefore assume better than you telling us everything that you're telling us right now, what you want to read about, is spectacularly arrogant. We tried it fails horribly as well, which is good to know. So here's the Utopian outline, but it's fixed, right? Just completely ignore the middle inference step. Why not go straight from looking at what you're on right now and then telling you what you should read right now? Right? You actually don't need to go through that middle step. The category that's being made here is assuming that we ever could do that intermediate step, and then even if we could do that intermediate step, that it would help us. So what do? Treat people right now as unique people. Right? Don't look at a long baseline history of what they've done before, because it's a very poor predictor. Right? Rank signals that are predictive of behavior and build a perturbative recommendation system. Right? We basically know what the ordered list of signals are that are likely to tell you what you want to read next, based on the things that we know literally right now. And this is important because when you're building recommendation systems, and we've talked a lot about the speed with which data has to be available to make a decision on, a recommendation system has to do it in under 100 milliseconds. Right, so you have to both access, process, and return the data in a very, very, very small window of time. You have to do it at massive scale, right? You're doing this for hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, or a million people coming through a site at a given amount of time. Like, this has to be quick. So, content first. If you're on a piece of content and it's on a reference site, right, for a bet. If you're on a reference site and you've come in, you've landed on a piece of content that solves a problem for you, that tells us what the problem is that you're trying to solve. And then we should know what content follows on from that. But that gives us a list of 10, 20, 30 things we could put next. Then you iterate over that list. Take source of traffic. People from Facebook like some stuff, Google like the other ones. Is it the weekend or not? That tells us whether it's more browsy or more focused. Time of day, time of week. If somebody's coming to our new health site, Very Well, which we launched in April, and it's the middle of the night and they're on their cell phone and it's on a piece of content about first aid, then we shouldn't faff around and try and tell you the 10 clickiest things about bandages that you need to know this week. We should tell you how to fix the thing that you're coming into and give you all the sources to find it if it's not there. So, how we actually went to build the content recommendation system, to get into just a little bit more detail. So, add metadata to all documents. A document is a useless thing until you can quantify it and turn it into a set of numbers. Simplest thing, obviously TF-IDF, look at text frequency, but build a text frequency and a document frequency based on the corpus you're comparing to. It turns out the word carbon fiber is not that informative in a composite site, but it's really, really important when you're looking at another site that doesn't use the word all the time. Entity extraction, pull those out, because entities, times, dates, locations, build a vector of entities for every document that gives you a very information-rich and very sparse vector for every document that allows you to do some really interesting things. Reading grade level is actually really informative, right? It just tells you whether it's simple or complex information. People who are reading information that's more straightforward, has a lower grade level, tends to flow into lower grade level content. If somebody's looking at more expert content within a site, that will have a higher grade level, so you can use it to substitute for expertise, which is interesting. You don't want to be giving somebody on a technical site 101 content if they're really at a much higher expertise level, which will show in the grade level. And then you can use these features to build a text distance between documents, right? There are lots of ways to build it off of a feature set like this. You iterate over things that are working, you use your readers to tell you what works, and you run the experiment iteratively until you get to a set of features that are relatively stable. You probably want to do this for each of the different sections of the content that you're working with, because a recommendation engine that's built for a food site is going to need a different set of parameters around all these things than on a health site, than on a wellness or fitness or nutrition site. Layer on separate distance measures for documents on top of just the text level ones. We have user co-occurrence, like we know the same users come in twice and they've come to two different sets of documents. We know that across all the million documents we have. So the user co-occurrence between documents gives a distance measure just from users directly to us, utterly irrespective of the actual text similarity measures. So it gives us a second orthogonal measure of document distance. And only use landing page likelihood. Like, people started on this page, because if you do it with all the pages they read, then you're just going to reproduce your own recommendation engine in your own data, and that was horribly circular. And then SERP distance overlap. So this is search engine results pages. So if this content tends to turn up on these pages alongside these other domains, and another URL tends to turn up on very similar domain lists, that gives you a similarity measure from the mind of Google. almost always useful when you can pick the mind of Google. It's cheating, but they cheat too, and they're bigger than I am, so I will steal their homework. And as a result of this, you get a distance measure between every piece of content. So this is actually the subdomains rather than the content themselves. But this is a nice, relatively stable force-directed diagram that comes off that kind of distance measure weighting with no taxonomy information applied to it. The coloring is the taxonomy, but there was no taxonomy information applied to this diagram to get it to here. And you see some very tightly clustered ones. The light green at the bottom right there is food content. But you see the other ones are fairly scattered around, and you have some very strong overlaps. And so what happened? When we rolled it out, engagement on the recommendations doubled, so it worked, which was nice. We consistently beat our own editors and writers, hands down, which was just personally very satisfying and entertaining. Because the one thing you get in a big editorial organization is, oh no, you can't possibly do that. We're not going to let algorithms run riot on this. We did it on the old site. Now we launched very well in April. We launched a large finance site a couple of weeks ago. We're launching a tech site in the middle of October, each of which is top 10, top 15 in the US. Now, the entirety of all recirculation and content recommendation on all of those sites is entirely powered by algorithms that the sciences team has written. And we've beaten every personalized recommendation system that we tested against, who are all trying to do it user by user. So we can understand the behavior of large populations, right? The internet is very good at telling us bulk, somewhat stereotypical, but actually pulling out big signals from big populations. Like the statistics of the internet is inordinately powerful when you look at everyone and what they're doing. Right? It allows us to look state by state and understand what the predictive interests are by state versus other states. Really interesting in an election year. We can do it by city, and then we can do it for the country as a whole, broken down by demographics. We can also understand the behavior of an individual who's on the site right now. We know what options we've given them, we can come up with the probability where they're going, and we can iterate and improve on top of that with the signals that we have. We cannot understand what that person is, like in and of themselves, with their decision-making process off the basis of like an article a month they read over the course of the last year. To even think that that were possible would be remarkable, right? But a lot of ad companies, internet companies, tech companies absolutely take that approach. But even in a world where you're Facebook and you see people on your site every day, day in, day out, you see their engagement with everything, you see how long they hover over things, you know the information they provided, you know the social network, you still don't know the phone call that they just got 5 minutes ago before they went onto the internet because they've just been told that their father died. Right? You don't know that information. If you know that it's their father's birthday and you go surface that information to them because you're damn sure that's who they are, that's not going to go well for you. It's certainly not going to go well for them. It's definitely not going to go well on a health site. We don't know the reason that got you to our health site today. And we had to fight pretty hard to make sure that our editors and our teams and the health content were aware that we are never going to know that information. So we need to build the site with that lack of knowledge. And it's not a lack of knowledge that we can fix, it's a lack of knowledge we will always have, and have that top of mind when designing for people coming into the site. This is just the last two fun slides. That was the conclusion, so there's two more here just for entertainment. It turns out when you listen to our users and you have this level of data, you can learn quite a lot. So in this case, this is actually our writers telling us the information. This is the content they produce and the topics that they discuss. This is entity tagged finance content going back to 2001. And this is occurrences of the entities: foreclosure, derivative, recession, credit default, swap, mortgage-backed security, subprime lending, and Lehman. And you can see actually this starts ramping up in mid-2006, going to 2007 and rising up. It turns out the other thing we spot is that you can actually see a spike in interest in budget cooking and budget recipes that doubles when Lehman falls and has only started relaxing after 2015. So even though all the other economic indicators are looking very healthy, the unemployment rate is going well, household income is starting to rise, the interest that people have in cooking cheap recipes and budgeting their dinners has stayed at double the expected level for the last 7 years. And what we can do if we're in a broader group and we run data science for Investopedia as well as a couple of other companies, you can take interest in particular topics and see whether or not it correlates to real world indices. So in this case, this is an anxiety index. So the blue line here is the economic anxiety of the US as measured by interest in particular stock and trading terms. 100 is somewhat the baseline here, and you can see clear features in this graph that correlate to actual negative movements in the market. The red line here is the VIX, right, so a measure of the volatility in the markets. Sometimes the VIX precedes the anxiety index. The red piece here is Brexit, right? The country was fairly suave about Brexit, didn't think it was going to be a thing. Brexit happens, you see the blue line jump up. The markets were a little shaky beforehand, but they also jump up on the same day, right? This is an external event that causes both of these metrics to move at the same time. For other measures, towards the end of last year, the anxiety index was significantly elevated well before the markets actually spiked in early January. And when we've gone and done a back testing across 4 years of daily data in here and run trading strategies against the S&P 500, you significantly outperform those strategies when you take into account a publisher's investment page view data, which is a rather entertaining thing to be able to do. And then when you say, okay, well, we have a lot of careers content, we have a lot of resume content, we can look at this in terms of predicting the unemployment rate. Rather than waiting for those statistics to come out, you could have a daily expected measure. We have a lot of pregnancy content, so you can start predicting birth and death rates. And we have a lot of, like the flea map that Google put out a long time ago is the first version of this kind of project, but we can certainly do it with the data that we have. So yes, to conclude, it's very, very hard to understand an individual person, but it is extremely straightforward to understand an entire country using publisher data. Thank you.